Can a truck become a Cadillac? That's the question this week on Motoring 99.
TSN's Motoring 99 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas Car Care, the way it should be.
Welcome to Motoring 88.
Thanks, Brad.
Now, I know you're testing cars each week, but even I know this is not a car.
No, that's right. This is one of the latest 4x4s. It's the fastest growing segment in the industry right now.
You know, that was our very first test drive on Motoring back in 1988, and as Graham said, the sport utility market was hot. Well, 10 years later, and nothing's changed. It's still hot. But who would have thought back then that today luxury car makers like Lincoln and Mercedes and Lexus would be building sport utilities, building trucks? Well, not only are they, but the luxury sport utility market is up 296% since 1986. So it should come as no surprise that about a year ago, the boys and girls at Cadillac got together for a meeting. And if you've been a fly on the wall, you'd have heard things like, well, if we can't beat them, let's join them, and better late than never. Anyway, we're here in Austin, Texas this week, that's right, this is Texas, to check out Cadillac's very first sport utility, better known as the Escalade.
Twice as many people in each segment of the market own a sport utility vehicle as they do a car, and that, you know, another indicator of just how fast and how big that market is getting. So Cadillac decided that we needed to participate because we want to be a participant in every viable market that there is in this business. And very remarkably, we turned this whole thing around, developed a new product called the Cadillac Escalade in just 7 months.
That may be a record time for General Motors, but it shouldn't come as a surprise. Along with the platform, the Escalade's mechanics, from the 5.7-liter V8 to the AutoTrack four-wheel drive system, are identical to the Chevy Tahoe and the GMC Yukon Denali.
No, it's not a Tahoe exterior. You got to look at the whole Cadillac image, okay? If you look at the interior, you're inside, you know you're in a Cadillac, from the shale leather interior to the wood trim along the doors. Matter of fact, the seats were designed in harmony with the suspension system. So when you ride, you are in a Cadillac. You get all the Cadillac benefits, from a 4-year warranty to the additional of the OnStar system that we put in for the actual security. That's something that Cadillac does offer. So it is not a Tahoe, it is not a Yukon, it is a Cadillac.
It's basically a loaded Denali, which is a good vehicle. I mean, the ride is exceptionally good on it. Performance is decent. You know, it's typical of the genre, and they're selling. I mean, they got to get the Cadillac deal or something, I guess. Part of the problem, obviously, is Lincoln's done so well with the Navigator that they get into these situations where the Navigator, where the Lincoln line, brand line, is now outselling Cadillac as a total brand name. And I guess there's a certain amount of that. We don't want to lose that. Let's get some of that back. The dealers always want another vehicle to sell. And that's where you get with those things. I mean, is it, earth-shaking? No, it's not earth-shaking. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, we're so confident about the segment that in our product plan going forward, over the next 10 years, we intend to bring to the market a new sport utility vehicle from Cadillac every 2 years. So the market is going to be there. Now, the market, as we understand it today, may be different. I think that you'll see a movement from large sport utility vehicles into a crossover, what we call a crossover vehicle, which is a combination of utility of a truck with the comfort of a car. But the consumer's need for utility is going to continue to grow.
Meanwhile, it's no secret that the Escalade surprised GMC, who are concerned it will cannibalize sales of the Yukon Denali.
I think the differences will be with our vehicle that there are some customer services that you can only get at a Cadillac dealership, and that will create some of the difference between the GMC version and ours.
I know a guy who's always had a sport utility. Always. He does one big hunting trip a year, but he must have his sport utility for that one big off-road hunting trip, and he'll suffer with it for the whole year, and for uses for which it's really not suited. But he's got it for that big hunting trip. Maybe he'll do one more little mini hunting trip and that sort of thing. So, hey, if he can pay the bill, that's all that matters. A Cadillac truck, a Cadillac truck, a Cadillac truck.
That's coming up later on Kenzie's Corner.
Cadillac truck.
This week we're in Cambridge, Ontario, home to Toyota's latest product. This is, of course, the 1999 Toyota Solara. Now, the question that begs to be answered, is this a sporty vehicle with luxury appointments, or is it a luxury car with sporty pretensions? Our tester came equipped with Toyota's silky smooth 3-litre V6 matched with an equally slick 4-speed automatic. With 200 horsepower and 214 pounds-feet of torque on tap, power is never an issue. That it rates as one of the very best 6s on the continent is an added bonus. The tip-in is fast, the response to throttle input's quick, and the gear ratio is well spaced and matched to the engine's characteristics. Reaching 100 kilometers an hour requires about 8.5 seconds, which is sporty enough to satisfy most prospective customers. In the beginning, this car was planned as the replacement for the Camry Coupe. Later on, it earned its own name. However, at the 11th hour and 59th minute, Toyota tacked the Camry nameplate on, hence to give it its proper name, the Camry Solara. Why? I think it's to give this car instant credibility. And why not? Worked very well for the Honda Accord. While Solara, as I will call it, is based on a platform that is essentially identical to that of the Camry, it is stronger, features a stiffer suspension package and a more aggressive feel. The strength comes from an additional cross brace between the shock towers that supports the front McPherson strut-based suspension and a reinforced transom between the trunk and passenger compartment. Both the shock and spring rates have been increased and deliver a considerably crisper feel than its four-door sibling. The power rack and pinion steering has also been revised to deliver a faster response and a heavier feel. Strategies aimed at imparting a sportier feel. You know, a trait I don't like about this new Solara is the fact that I can beat the power steering. Now, 99% of the time won't make a difference. However, in an evasive maneuver where you dial in left then right steering, the transition point there, it runs out of pump pressure and it could turn around and just bite your bum. Stopping power comes from a 4-wheel disc brake setup that comes complete with standard anti-lock. The pedal feel is firm, easily modulated, and the ABS only engages when absolutely needed. As a result, stopping the Solara from 80 kilometers an hour requires but 34.6 meters. Again, the system is up to the demands of the rest of the car. One of the curious decisions they made with the new Solara was to put a sunroof on every one of the V6 models. Now, the problem is, if you're tall of torso as I am, your head brushes against the headlining. Not a good thing. If they offered a car without the sunroof, I'd have about 3/4 of an inch of headroom. The Solara comes equipped with an above-average level of standard stuff. The SLE tested came with power everything, 8-way leather seats, traction control, climate control, and an up-level JBL sound system that pumps out superior sound. The Solara has more rear seat legroom than any other vehicle in this class, meaning it's a usable back seat. It also gets 60/40 split folding rear seats and a surprisingly roomy trunk. However, the shiny paint on the bumper is destined for damage because it's not protected and you're going to ding it as you load and unload the trunk. The other thing I find rather curious, there are no side airbags, nor are there plans for them. If you ask me, Toyota should rethink that one. So what is the answer to the question? If you're looking for a sports car, this is not the vehicle for you. However, if you like your luxuries and you're looking for a little fun, it most certainly is.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns proper wheel bolt torque. It's an important final step to installing a wheel or tire that you correctly torque all the fasteners. I'm going to show you how to use a click type torque wrench today. To do that, there's a sequence and a specific torque value to be followed on each car. Be aware that if you're using an impact gun to tighten these, you can easily over tighten them. In that case, you could easily damage the studs or nuts, distort the wheel. You can even twist the brake drum or rotor. And there again, if you under torque them, the wheel can become loose and detached from the car. Keep in mind there's an adapter available nowadays called a Torque Pro that limits the amount of torque an impact gun can transfer to those wheel nuts. It'd be a good idea for service professionals to use that when they're installing the wheel. If the customer ever gets a flat tire, they'll be able to remove the wheel properly. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Six years ago, Dave Webb joined Grand Touring Automobiles in Toronto, Canada's #1 dealer for Jaguar, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley. In doing so, Dave fulfilled a lifelong ambition.
Certainly, to get experience, I worked on, whatever was available to work on, family cars. Parents drove Mercuries and so on, but Rolls has always had a special spot for me. I always sort of figured that Rolls is the top, and that's what I set my sights for. That's what I wanted to be able to take apart and put together was a Rolls.
But for David Webb, his passion for Rolls-Royce goes beyond the service bay.
I've got three cars. I've got a 1938 Rolls-Royce Phantom 3, a 1972 Silver Shadow, and a 1965 Plymouth Barracuda. My parents passed away a couple years ago, and I was in a position where I was able to buy them from their estate and carry the flame, so to speak. A lot of people think of Rolls-Royce as a symbol of success, which unfortunately, due to the cost, that is a sort of a requirement, for some people. But I just like them because it's the right way to build a car. If you were set out and cost was no objective, how would you do it? And I would like to think that that's the right way that you could put it together. This picture here is, I was probably about 8 years old, shortly after we got the Phantom 3, and it was being torn apart to undergo its restoration. I think you can tell by the look on my face there, pretty much says it all, how amazed I was by everything that was going on. This is another photograph of the car with all the paint stripped off, being torn apart, no fenders. This is a photograph of my parents going to a 30s costume ball, and that was obviously the appropriate car to take, so that worked out very well. And this picture here is kind of interesting. My grandfather entered a contest in 100 words or less to say what was so great about the new Packard. I think it was 1935. And this is a picture of my father and my grandfather having won the car in this contest, being presented with the keys in their driveway. Unfortunately, they didn't have a lot of money, and my grandfather had to sell the car shortly thereafter, but that's kind of an interesting photograph. It's a pretty complicated engine in its day. It had hydraulic tappets and V12, which was very popular. Cadillac had their V16s, and Lincoln had 12-cylinder back then. Aluminum crankcase, aluminum cylinder heads, twin spark ignition, about 170 horsepower, but oodles of torque. Drives like a tank. A lot of cars from this era, especially Rolls-Royces, they had picnic tables or bars in the back seat. This one is a little bit different, probably because it was owned by a lady. Has these lovely vanity cases in the back with a spot for a brush or some perfume or maybe some face powder. I don't know. They aren't still with the car anymore. When I'm driving the car, I'm just sort of thinking what this car was like when it was brand new, and I'm always amazed how well this car performs even today. The brakes are great and the power is really fantastic. It can keep up on highway speeds no problem. And having driven a lot of cars from this era makes me appreciate even more how really, you know, state-of-the-art this car was in its day. I think it'll outperform just about anything from this era.
You know, if the police in Canada think they have a tough job stopping drinking and driving, I'm afraid they're going to get no sympathy from the police force here in Texas. Example number one, it's strictly legal to drop in any gas station or store along the highway and purchase one single beer. Like one officer told me the other day, like people are going to wait till they get home before drinking it. And secondly, and this is the real kicker, it is perfectly legal to drive with an open beer. Now, it's illegal if the police catch you taking a sip. Now, does this sound like a deterrent against drinking and driving? I don't think so, and neither do the police down here, as if their job is not tough enough. All right, now let's head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
Brad, all I can say is only in the United States. I mean, it's hard to believe. That would be like you giving me the keys to a Corvette or a Porsche and saying, here, Bill, take it out for a spin on the Autobahn, but don't speed. I don't think so. Anyhow, what I want to talk about this week, Brad, is a big portion of our business these days is confirming or denying a diagnosis or an estimate from another repair shop. Consumers are getting smart and they're shopping things around and making sure that they've got the straight goods the first time on these car repairs. And believe me, it's very important that you do this. A couple of cases in point this week alone. We had a Honda Civic with a terrible, what the customer described as a transmission noise. He wanted a price on rebuilding the transmission or replacing the transmission in this car. Situation was that going straight ahead, the car was nice and quiet, but when he turned the steering wheel slightly left or right and applied some power, it sounded like a machine gun in the front end of this car. Now, any of you with experience on front-wheel drive cars have already read between the lines and said the CV joints are gone, and that's exactly what was wrong with the car. Both outer CV joints were worn out in this car, and that was the source of the noise. But because the shop that the guy took the car to had not road tested the car, they were about to do some repairs that would have been a total waste of time. Now, there legitimately was something wrong with this car. They were just going to tackle the wrong thing, and it would have been a total waste of time. Second car was a whole different situation. A 91 Chevy Caprice with 73,000 kilometers on it. The lady had bought the thing as a used car, and quite near the beginning of her ownership of the car, had taken it into a GM dealer and had outer tie rod ends, an idler arm, and supposedly some ball joints replaced in this car. They also did an alignment and wheel balance, and the car was driving quite fine. 6 months down the road, which was just a few days ago, she takes it into a shop B, and they look at the car. The car was only in for an oil change, but they gave her an estimate on some repairs that they figured the car needed, and they wanted to replace a whole bunch of parts, the idler arm, tie rod ends, etc., that GM had replaced 6 months earlier on her car. She happened to be an acquaintance of our own Jim Kenzie. Jim referred her to me. When we looked at the car, the steering linkage parts that they wanted to replace were not worn out on this car. The ones that GM had replaced were still quite serviceable, and this was a case of simply trying to oversell a job. She was about to get a whole bunch of parts she didn't require. Now, here's a list of things that can help you avoid situations like this. First and foremost, I think it's really important that you come to the repair shop armed with a list of the problems with your car. A clean, concise list of the problems, the symptoms, and, for example, the conditions under which the car acts up, because that's going to be really helpful. Something that can be stapled to the work order or left in the car so it's handed down to the person who's ultimately got to fix that car. Secondly, it's very important that whoever's going to fix your car road tests the car and make sure that you're on the same wavelength as to what that problem actually is. There's no point in bringing the car straight into the shop and starting to rip it apart. You've got to make sure that you've verified that A, there is a problem, and B, we're talking about the same problem. Thirdly, don't be afraid to get another opinion if you're not comfortable with the diagnosis. And finally, once you've found that shop or mechanic that you trust to do the right job the first time, make sure that you continue to go there for follow-up repairs and maintenance on your car, because life will get a whole lot easier. Now, regardless of who you go to, make sure that you go in there prepared, as I've mentioned, and it's going to make everybody's life a whole lot easier. Until next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 99.
The Cadillac Escalade sport utility vehicle. A Cadillac truck? Well, I guess if Lincoln and Mercedes have trucks. You know, we're here in Texas at the preview of the Escalade, and it was in Texas a bunch of years ago when the Hunt brothers tried to corner the world market in silver. When we first saw the Escalade, we thought maybe Lincoln Navigator had cornered the world market in chrome and didn't leave any for the Escalade. There's hardly any chrome on this truck. The Cadillac officials told us that originally they had chrome everywhere, on the mirrors, around the windows, and across the tailgate. But in the clinics, the customers told them, Cadillac customers told them, get the chrome off. Hey, those Cadillac boys are coming around. Now, Cadillac wasn't planning on getting into this segment until the year 2000. But the luxury sport utility segment has exploded in the last few years. With the Navigator and the M-Class and the Lexus LX 470, Cadillac couldn't afford to wait. So they borrowed the Denali from GMC, put a Cadillac grille on it, some leather and wood inside, Bilstein shocks, a couple other little toys, presto, Cadillac Escalade. Now, GMC wasn't too happy about that because they thought they were supposed to be the upscale GM truck division, but hey, you got to be a team player in the business these days. Now, regular viewers will know I'm not a huge fan of sport utility vehicles, but I got to tell you, if I'm a Cadillac dealer and all my DeVille customers are coming in and dumping their cars off lease and going across the street to buy a Lincoln Navigator or an M-Class, I tell you, I'm pretty happy to have this particular vehicle on my lot. I'm Jim Kenzie. Well, automotive journalists are getting a chance to take a few laps in the 1999 Buick lineup. And you know, when you think of performance, you don't usually think of Buick. But the 3.8 supercharged V6 that's available in the Regal, Riviera, and Park Avenue is still tops with 240 horsepower in this mid-size sedan segment. Well, you know, it seems that lately we've been talking more about trucks than cars on Motoring. But it was just the other day, an automotive executive told me that it won't be long before they're selling more trucks in North America than cars. How about that? That's it for now. We'll see you next week as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
I really like what the whole Saturn philosophy is all about. I just hope they don't lose all the momentum they've got now.
TSN's Motoring 99 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.